right, well, I think we could get started. And for everybody, well, actually, I have a few announcements before. So Julia, I'm going to make a few announcements here
Okay.
about, we have a really active fall. And so as all of you know, most of you know, we have the garden party this Sunday. So I'm going to just read it. 355 South Windsor Boulevard, home of Mrs. June Bilgore, is the location of our next annual meeting. We're honoring outgoing Captain Shannon Paulson and introducing her successor, Captain Sonia Monaco. Our special guest speaker is Spectrum TV's the SoCal scene host and vintage Los Angeles online community creator, Allison Martino. Allison will delight us with her insights of growing up in Los Angeles and being the daughter of late singer Al Martino, Johnny Fontaine of The Godfather.
Oh my gosh.
Allison corrected me. I had spelled Fontaine, F-O-N-T-A-I-N-E. So it's Fontaine, F-O-N-T-A-N-E.
How dare you.
Food and drink will be served, and there are only a few tickets left. Actually, we're sold out. So we just
There are no tickets left.
No tickets left. We're sold out. And by the way, Joseph and Jolene, are you dealing with the music for this? I'm leaving it up to you guys. And Alex, Elliot, by the way. So we got to coordinate the music that we were talking about. We'll talk about that tomorrow. All right. So the next thing is that we have this really good thing going on. You know, I've been on every historic home tour from Key West to New York, San Francisco. Nothing is in LA that we're doing historic walking tours of Windsor Square and Hancock Park. Brad Parsons and Eleanor Schrader got together. Eleanor is a teacher. Eleanor is an award-winning educator, lecturer, and author. She lectures worldwide. She's a great speaker. We went on this, actually Juanita was there and Joseph too. We went on this a few weeks ago, 2 hours. We met at the Bell, walked around Windsor Square. It's really fun. He's like highlighting everything that we know or didn't know, and she highlights the architecture. So they're going to do a twilight tour of the same tour, and it's going to be on September 18th from 5 to 7. And tickets are going to be on sale on our website very shortly. It was great. It was really good. And it's one of 9 walking tours that they've created for Windsor Square and Hancock Park specifically. So
does one go on Wilcox? Because I think they walk by my house all the time.
we just started this.
Okay, because there's some walking tour. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, what are they doing in Wilcox? You got to tell me what.
I don't know. It's like every now, because my husband's office faces the front, and every now and then a tour group walks by.
Really?
And because, you know, the house across the street from me is where Kim Bassinger's character in LA Confidential lived in that house.
Oh yeah.
So I guess they're saying, oh, and here, blah 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 blah.
They like that.
Yeah, I know the house. It has a big bit of a window in the front around.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then next to it is there's no house next to it. Yeah.
Yes,
Oh.
exactly. That's the one. So when
Oh.
that one went on the market, everybody in the neighborhood like raced over because we're like, we were dying to go inside it. So it was fun to see.
Oh, so that's from the LA Confidential. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, there you go.
So Danny DeVito hides in this little mirrored closet that's actually in, I mean, it may not be there now because they've renovated it, but it was in there. So.
Oh, you know what? This might become part of the tour eventually. This little tidbit that you just told me there. All right.
Yeah, the guys who wrote Whatever Happened to Baby Jane lived in the block behind me on the corner, like Cahuenga. It's the southwest corner. That's where the producer of Whatever Happened to Baby
You mean
Jane.
the director, you mean, I know who you're talking about. You, the director, you mean?
I think so. I can't remember now. Like
Actually,
I didn't review for the test that you were about to.
Your test is coming up pretty soon. No, actually, it's funny you're saying that because on the tour, we were on, I think it was Plymouth, and he said this is, and I'm forgetting the name of the guy.
Happy Days house is on,
Well,
Plymouth, I'm sorry, that's on Cahuenga,
Well,
sorry.
he said that the director lived in this huge mansion, and I never knew that. I thought it was right where you're talking about. So
Yeah,
I think we have
maybe.
to get that straight. We gotta
Yes.
get that.
Work it out,
Okay.
Richard.
Anyway,
I interrupted you. Go ahead.
this is going to be a good, this is going to be a nice addition to what we do at the Historical Society. So I'm thrilled about that. Before we get to Better Luck Next Time, next month we have Adrian American Designer, Hollywood Original, and that's on Wednesday, September 22nd at 7 o'clock. In 1933, Fortune magazine suggested to the American fashion industry that they could benefit from the showmanship demonstrated by the Hollywood designers in order to compete with the French couturiers. So the Hollywood designer Fortune most praised was Adrian of MGM. It was a logical choice as Adrian's design for Joan Crawford in 32 film Letty Linton, which I have never seen, dominated the fashion industry for the next 2 years. So join us for Adrian, American designer. Richard Matukonis/Adkins is going to do that. Now, tonight we have this a special thing. So as I said, you guys, we're used to historic stuff all around Los Angeles. This is a novel, but it's a historic novel. And Julia's, well, let me just introduce Julia. Julia Claiborne Johnson is a Hancock Park resident and LA Tennis Club member who has written her second novel published by HarperCollins. Julia is the author of best-selling Be Frank with Me, a finalist for the American Booksellers Association Best Debut Novel Award. She grew up on a farm in Tennessee before moving to New York City, where she worked at Mademoiselle. In fact, you put Mademoiselle out of business. Is that what I understand?
I did, yes. No, sadly, they folded after I left. They were like, there's no point in going on. She's left us.
What year did you work at? What year did you work at Mademoiselle?
Oh gosh. Well, let's see, 1957. I don't know. It was
must have been in the 90s or 80s.
Yes, late 80s.
Late 80s.
Maybe in the early 90s. I can't remember.
Okay, all right. And so Mademoiselle and Glamour. She now lives in Los Angeles with her comedy writer husband and their 2 children. How old are your children now, by the way?
I can't believe it. They're 24 and 22.
They were little girls at one time.
They were tiny, and one of them was a boy, but they were very small.
You know, we were at a I have this memory, there was an estate sale at a house right near you, or maybe next door, years ago, and I had just gone through this divorce. I was looking for some furniture, and there were these 2 great twin beds with this, you have them, I know you had them for years, these wonderful wooden decorative, you bought them, I think.
I don't think so, because I have a million beds. I bought a desk, if it was next door, because the guy he was a senator under Abraham Lincoln, and his granddaughter lived there. So that tells you how old she was.
Oh, really?
And so Seward, he was Cole. And so where DMV is named after, I got a couple of things for you, where DMV is named after him, Senator Cole. And the reason Vine turns into Rossmore at the corner of Melrose is because from Melrose up to the hills was his rancho. And that was the corner of his vineyard. So really? It ended there. And then, so it was all lemon groves up that way. Because I got all this from Rhodey's, was the old lady, and her daughter told me all of this. So.
Oh, that's a great piece of information. Julia, I think you need to join the Historical Society.
I think, don't I belong to it? I don't know. Maybe I don't. I thought I did.
I don't think you do, but you're going to get Marlene. She's got to get an application.
Yes, I have way too much like trivia knowledge about it.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. This is great stuff. All right, the end of this introduction is that so husband and 2 children join. Yeah. So all right, the story is that Julia's. You're going to tell the story. Go ahead.
Yes, sure.
About your dad and all that. Go ahead.
Has anybody read this book? So I know whether okay, nobody's read it, so I'll know. I want to do it. So in real life, during
I promise you, I'm buying it tomorrow.
Okay. It was the Barnes & Noble book club pick for January. And so there's a special Barnes & Noble edition. It looks like this. It has a little circle on it. And I'd rather you buy the book at Chevalier's, but they're all the ones at Barnes & Noble, all of their this year's book club picks are on half price until like next week, I think.
Oh, nice.
For the whole year. You can just race out there and it has pictures in it. Anyway, in real life, my father was born in 1917. And in real life, during the Depression, he got a job working as a fake cowboy on a divorce ranch outside of Reno. And when I was a kid, he told a couple of funny stories about it, but he was very compartmentalized about it. And by the time, I was grown up before I thought, oh, wait a minute, everybody's dad didn't do this. And I didn't ask questions when he was able to answer me because, he got dementia and couldn't talk about it anymore. But what you had to do, Nevada had divorce laws where you could go there and live there for 6 weeks and then you could be sprung. So if any of you have seen The Women.
Julia, hold on one second. everybody, remember we have, oh, you muted everybody, I think, right? Because
Yeah,
you were
I've
set-
done it. I'm doing it.
There we
Okay.
go. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Julia. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
So anyway, the woman who wrote The Women, if you've seen that movie, she went to Reno to get her divorce. She stayed on a divorce ranch. And that's how it happened to be in the movie. And everybody used to go because it started because in the middle of the 1800s, there was a silver rush in Nevada. And so there are all these miners and there weren't a lot of women. So what women were there, they're like, look, if you're not happily married, let's set you free so you can marry somebody else, because it stabilizes society for people to be married. So they had these very lenient divorce laws then, and then it started getting closer, shorter and shorter. Mary Pickford, who lived here, wanted to marry Douglas Fairbanks, and people had heard about the fact that you could go live in Nevada and get it quicker than you would if you had to sit around and wait for it to happen. So rich people from New York started to go to Nevada, and people from LA, like actors and stuff. So, and during the Depression, they got in kind of a war with Hot Springs, Alabama, because you could do it there quicker too. So they just kept making the time less and less. So then it got down to be like 6 weeks in Reno. So it's a thing.
If I can interrupt, how long was it previous to the 6 weeks?
It was 3 months. First it was 6 months, then it was 3 months.
Wow.
And then they were like, we need these tourism dollars. And they had gambling too. So they got it down to 6 weeks. So people would go there and everybody used to go. I mean, it was on the cover of Life magazine in 1937. I have a picture of it, which you can see here. This lady has just gotten her divorce at the courthouse. This is the column of the courthouse. So what you were supposed to do was like, you got divorced, you'd go outside, you'd kiss the column, you'd throw your wedding rings in the river that was right there. And then you could go back in the courthouse and get married again, like 15 minutes later. So there were people who would get married like 11 times, not the same day, but so it's really a thing. And like so many people, like that's where Carol Lombard and William Powell got divorced there. Johnny Weissmuller got divorced there. And there used to be a fancy hotel there called the Mapes. So when he was in town, it was in the 50s. He got a divorce and they're like, Tarzan of the Mapes. That just made me laugh really hard. Boris Karloff got divorced there, like everybody. And nobody remembers it anymore because I did a book group in Reno where the girls were, I could have been their mothers. I would have been a teen mom, but they were young and they lived in Reno and they had never heard of it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was just like, wow, it's just like 2 generations and nobody remembers it anymore. So that's why I thought it would be kind of a good idea for a book. And the story had already been told from the woman's point of view. And I knew about it because of my father. So that was my way in. Because a lot of people have said, like, why didn't you write it from the women's point of view? And I was like, it's been done already. And I was telling Richard earlier that a couple of my favorite books are True Grit by Charles Portis and Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I have all my favorite novels on my desk. And so I was sitting here like staring off into space and my eyes fell out and I went, oh my God, I'm writing Remains of the Day meets True Grit. And the cowboys are the butlers. So basically it's like the upstairs downstairs version of it told, it's told from the downstairs point of view. So the cowboy who is based on my father, but just in fact, not, just in his existence, it's not any truth about him is in there. That's why he's the narrator. So, but that's, I was also telling Richard earlier that my father had 2 wives and his first wife, he was the second of her 6 husbands. And he was from a small town in Brownsville, called Brownsville, Tennessee. It's in West Tennessee. And he grew up on a dairy farm. I was like, and he was married to a fantastically wealthy first wife. And I was like, where did he meet somebody who was fantastically wealthy, who would then go on to have 6 husbands? So I think he must have met her there. So it was fun to do the research for this book because I got to sort of understand what the job was. Because he said, my job was to I was supposed to talk to the ladies. I was supposed to dance with them. I was supposed to play cards with them, and just chit chat. And I was like, how's that a job? But then once I did the research, I was like, oh, it is a job. Like it was a valuable source, because all these ladies have come out to get their divorces and most of them are not very happy about it. Even if they're glad to get divorced, it's a heartbreaking situation. So, and he was very charming and a really good dancer and a good storyteller. So it was
And
really
he was handsome too.
he was
showed
very
us a
handsome. Oh, I
picture.
have a picture of him. Here's a picture. This is when he was about to go to World War II. And I think he's maybe 26 in this picture. I do not have a picture of him at the ranch, and I don't know where he worked or how long he was there.
You said before you were telling us earlier, before he started working there, he was doing construction.
He was working construction somewhere out west, and he heard about this job. He's like, I don't know, dancing with ladies and like playing cards with them sounds a lot more fun than working construction.
Yeah.
And it was perfect. And he knew how to ride a horse, which I guess most people still did in the 30s, but it was perfectly suited to his skill set. So he went and worked there for however long. And I went to the Historic Society in Reno, and they were so excited and they were trying to help me find him, but I didn't know exactly when he was there or where he had worked. So we couldn't locate where he'd been, but it was actually kind of freeing that I didn't know the actual fact of it, because then I could make the place up. Right. So how it would be is completely real, but it's all, the ranch is made up where it's located. I had maps. I'd be like, okay, where would it be? That was really fun. So anyway,
nice.
That's how it got started.
This is I understand that he had Alzheimer's near the end, and
yes, he couldn't really, like, by the time, how when your parents tell you a story and you're like, oh, here we go with this one again, and you just totally tune out. And by the time I got old enough to be interested in it, it was too late, because he had dementia. And the story is told from the point of view of a retired doctor who's in a nursing home, and he's physically frail. That's why he's there. And my mother is a doctor. She's 92 years old, and she is in a care home. And I actually did a piece for NPR about this, because she has bad dementia. So, but it's like the sadness of her situation really spoke to me. And that's why it's set up this way. It's like this guy's telling the story of his youth from this place where he is now. And it's in 1988 and 1938. Those are the two time frames. And he'd been so key to this community where he was a doctor, and now he's just kind of shuffled aside because he doesn't have a family. So that was sort of the setup. And it's a funny, kind of a giddy kind of a book with deep undercurrents of sadness. And that's what the NPR piece was about. It's about like why it's told the way it is. And they're in the paperback, they're going to run that piece in there too, because it gives you another level of understanding why it's the way it is. So
nice. This is fascinating. You never, other than that movie, The Women, this is a subject, an area that I have not ever encountered after.
But check it out. So like about a month ago, my husband, Chris Marshall, the funniest man alive, and I were watching His Gal Friday.
Oh yeah.
So Rosalind Russell comes cruising into the newsroom, and she's divorced Cary Grant, and she comes cruising into the newsroom and says to him, well, Walter, I've done my 6 weeks in Reno and now I'm free of you. And I went, oh my God, because I have seen that movie a million times. I had no idea what they were talking about. And that now suddenly I know, oh, she went to Reno to get divorced. And it's also in maybe The Awful Truth. Cary Grant goes off. Cary Grant apparently was the most popular guy to divorce in Reno during the Depression years. So there's like a gag about Cary Grant in this book, just because I thought it was so funny that everybody was getting divorced from him. So when you know it exists and the particulars of it, it actually does pop up in movies a lot. It's just like a throwaway joke, though.
Interesting. It would be nice. My wish for you, of course, is that it goes and becomes something else, so that another generation can understand, what was there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do a lot of book groups, and I was doing this book group in Northern California, and the ladies were in their probably 70s to 80s. And one of them at the end said, I have a story for you. I was like, okay. She said, I got divorced in Reno. So she told the whole story. She's like, she didn't stay at a dude ranch like my characters did, but she rented a house. She took her kids with her. She said, we walked all over Reno. I had them in a little red wagon. I got divorced. I went outside. I threw my rings into the river and I got married again instantly. And I was like, oh my God, it's just, I said, did I get everything right? She's like, everything was perfect. And I went, Richard, it was so thrilling. I could hardly stand it, you know?
I think in California, you had to wait a year
Yeah. So
at
people,
least.
so then I did a book group in Nashville, and it was a bunch of divorce lawyers and judges. And they explained to me one of the reasons it fell apart, the divorce industry. What part of it was no fault, which I knew about. Part of it was once people had cars after the war, it was easier to get to Vegas. So they would just go to Vegas. But another reason the whole Nevada thing fell apart was there was a famous, these lawyers told me, a famous court case called, oh my God, versus the state of North Carolina. What's the guy's name? I'm just blanked on it. Anyway, it's in, I can tell you later. Call me in 15 minutes, I'll come back to it. But these two people in North Carolina went to Reno, got divorced, married each other. They went home. But North Carolina did not recognize the divorce laws of Nevada. So their spouses both sued them. Each spouse got, you know, the two who were married got sued by their former spouses, and they both did jail time. So you had to be careful. You had to do your research. Like if you stayed in Nevada, you were okay, but some states would not recognize it. So that was sort of like the beginning of the end in many ways. Williams versus the state of North Carolina. That's what it was called. So that's what's fun to do book groups. You find out all these things that you didn't know from them. So
when I sent out on August 12th, I got, surprisingly, this gal Suzette Kitzelman, who is, I thought had a German accent, but she wrote back, she said, hi, Richard, how are you doing these days? My grandmother, Leslie Curtis, was sent by a New York newspaper to Reno to cover the divorce capital of America in 1911, she wrote.
Right.
A book called Reno Reveries, and then bought a dude ranch at Pyramid Lake outside Reno. Yes. I was born there, but not until the 50s. LOL. Small world, isn't it? They must have moved her to Germany. It's when she was a kid.
I think I have that book, actually, Reno Reveries.
Really?
It's like a brown book. It actually, I don't remember, because I read every book I could find that had anything, and there's surprisingly little about it. So I think I bought that one because I just went on, you know, eBay and looked for books about it. But there's a scene in Pyramid Lake in my book because, and this is funny too, this is how like how novels come together. I had a friend who's a librarian in Manhattan, and she has a friend who's an installation artist. So that means that like she would rent, like by the Holland Tunnel, a sign and just put a word on it, and then see how many people went on to Merriam-Webster to look up to see what it meant, because it was a weird word. So my friend said, this woman's name's also Julia. Julia Weiss needs to get a sentence into a book. And I know you're writing one. Will you try to get it in there? And I said, well, sure. What is it? And she said, it's why is the fish crying? So that was not easy to get in there. But then I was like, oh, Pyramid Lake. There was a divorce ranch on Pyramid Lake. And that must be the one that this woman had.
Yeah.
So I set a scene at Pyramid Lake, and because I used to have these trout in Pyramid Lake that weighed like 100 pounds. They were like 20, you know, like this long, like 6 feet long and stuff. They're no longer there, I'm sure. So, but it's just funny, like, and then it turned out to be my favorite scene in the whole book, and it never would have been there, but for this random thing. So
interesting. So so take us through a little bit. You know, I know that I haven't read the book, but take us a little bit through the book and without giving everything away. Can you do that?
Oh, okay, sure. There, you know, the cowboy who's our narrator is named Ward, and he had been at Yale, and his parents lost all their money in the Depression. And so he has to drop out. He was a pre-med student at Yale. So he had to drop out and get a job to support his parents. He's their only child, and they're living in a small town in West Tennessee, which is named Whistler, which is made up. But somebody from West Tennessee said, I got a map out. I was trying to find Whistler. I was like, I made it up. But I was so happy that she was convinced it was real. Anyway, so he gets this, first he works on the Boulder Dam. And then that ends, and then he gets this other job because he's very sculpted now because he has been doing manual labor at the Boulder Dam. And so part of his job is like, if it's warm enough out, he's supposed to do his chores without a shirt on, just for the ladies, because they need a little amusement. So he's also like the chorus girl in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. That was another way I thought of it. So, but it's galling for him because he was a smart guy and valued for his brain, and suddenly he's arm candy. So this is a tough mind screw for him to deal with. So his last 6-week cycle, 2 women come. One is from San Francisco, and she drove there from San Francisco, and her husband's been cheating on her. And then there's an aviatrix who is from St. Louis, and she flies herself there. So those 2 become partners in crime. They're younger than most of the divorcees. And then he sort of falls in with them, and hijinks ensue. Because the reason it's an aviatrix is, I don't know if you guys read obituaries, but I am obsessed with obituaries, and the New York Times ones are so great. And they had a documentary about the New York Times obituaries called Obit. And they were taking the filmmakers through the catacombs where they write the obituaries ahead of time if you're very old or you have a dangerous occupation, so they think you might die soon. So they were showing the guy or whoever was making the movie, the one they'd had the longest, and it was for a woman named Eleanor Smith. And when she was 15 or 16, she had flown her plane under every bridge that went around Manhattan. Every one of them. Nobody's done it before or since.
Wow.
And so they're like, well, she's gonna die young, but then she lived to be 98.
Yeah.
So that was the one they'd had the longest. And I was like, wait a minute, I was obsessed. So I read her memoir. And then I fell into this rabbit hole of aviatrix memoirs, because in the 30s, like these rich ladies were like, everybody's gonna have a plane, and it's like getting a car. Everybody's gonna drive one.
Yeah.
So I was like, one of my friends, I have this friend from my hometown my mother was his mother's doctor. And his mother, who was not 5 feet tall, I don't think, had been a WASP during World War II, Women's Auxiliary Service Pilot, maybe. I can never remember what it stands for. And they were allowed to deliver planes or teach guys to fly during the war, but they couldn't do anything else. So between those 2 things, I was like, okay, she's going to be an aviatrix. So then I decided what kind of plane she was going to fly. So a tiger moth, I think is what it's called. And I went on YouTube, because you can look up walk-arounds of things that you wouldn't see normal. So this guy had this plane, and the wings fold back like a bird's wings when they are on a branch. And so he walks around, he says, here's how it works. And because people thought they were going to have them in their garages, because everybody was going to fly. He brings, and it looks like a soap box derby car folded up. I mean, it is terrifying. Then he wheels the wing out, and he takes this metal thing that's about the size of my finger, and it goes like this and goes in a slot. And then he takes a strap that's about like my watch strap, straps it over to hold that thing in place, and it snaps. It doesn't even buckle. And that's what holds the wing in place. And I was like, oh my God, I would never set foot in that death trap. And so the woman who drives out from San Francisco, when her friend is going to take her for a ride in the plane, that is what she says when she sees this wing fly. I'd never get in that thing. So anyway, there's their summer of adventures, and there's a love story, there's tragedy, they're horses.
When you said aviatrix, I thought for a second that maybe she was one of those women that stood on the wings.
She is a rich girl. She's not a wing walker, but who was a wing walker is, because I read his memoir too, is Charles Lindbergh. So that was how he started out. And his book is really good. Like A Spirit of St. Louis. Who knew it was really good? It's fantastic.
Really?
And I read another one called West with the Night by Beryl Markham. Do you know who that was? She was the first human, male or female, to fly from Europe to America. Wow. And she wrote this incredibly fabulous memoir, which I can't believe I never read it. Like everybody should read it. It's called West with the Night. And so in the
She
book.
she was in Africa, wasn't she?
Yes, she was
Yes,
her,
and there's a movie.
yes,
about
because
her.
she had a fling with Isaac Denison's husband. I think.
Yes, yes.
She also raced horses. She was quite the character. And so she her plane wasn't fitted with a radio, and so my character isn't either. And what she would do, she had this leather pouch and it had streamers on it, and she had a pad that she strapped to her thigh and a pencil, and so then she would write messages on it, put it in the pouch and throw it over the side, and that's how she communicated with the ground. So this is how the person in my book does too, which I loved that fact. So that's why it's really fun to write a book like this, where you get to do a lot of research and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can use this. So that's the fun part. Most of it's not that much fun, but anyway.
Nice. Oh,
So did you travel around Reno a lot for, background?
I went for 3, whoa, there went my ring light. I went for 3 days, and I drove around. I had a lot of books about it that I studied with great focus. At the Nevada Historical Society, they told me about newspapers.com. I don't know if you guys know this website, but you join it, it's like $30 a year or something. And you can read newspapers from all over our nation through history. So I read like decades of Reno newspapers, the Gazette. It was great because you could see how much a pair of shoes was like a quarter. And like the movies they were going to see and where the movie theaters were, like that was also fascinating. So that was really, there's a scene in a place called Tony's Italian Ballroom. So that's how I know about that, from reading about it in the Reno Gazette. So they would have a masquerade ball like once a month. And so there's a scene in the book set of this masquerade ball, because I was like, okay, because here's the thing, Reno is high altitude, right? And so they're ladies who are upset. They're probably not sleeping well. They're in high altitude and they're heartbroken and they're drinking, like probably wouldn't be too much at home, but because the combination of factors, they would just get out of their minds drunk. And so somebody would have to take care of them, So that was part of the cowboys' job, is they had to make sure everybody got home in one piece, So that was really interesting.
It's like a camp for adults.
It was like Dirty Dancing, in the high desert, basically. So, but yeah, it was just fascinating. And the reason the book is called Better Luck Next Time is there was the most famous divorce judge in Reno was named George Bartlett. And George Bartlett, when he hit his gavel to set people free, hit his gavel and say, better luck next time. That was his thing. So my cousin Denise Dubois lives in Como, Mississippi. And so I was telling her this story back when I was writing it. And she goes, wait a minute. Mike Bartlett, who is one of my best friends here in Como, is Judge Bartlett's grandson. And you have met Mike Bartlett. And I was like, what? Because when I went on my book tour for my first book, I did the Mississippi Book Festival. And they came up and we had dinner. But, his name hadn't stuck with me because I didn't know that George Bartlett was going to give me the title to my next book at that point. But it's just such a small world, it's crazy.
And it's a really nice title, by the way. It just says it all,
Mm-hmm. And I love the cover because it's like, I kept saying to him, not too cowboy, because I just didn't want people to go in thinking it was a cowboy novel.
Yeah.
It's like a heartbreak novel. And it's like the ladies, as you can see, there's like a bow and arrow motif going there, which is very exciting to me. And one of them is short and dark haired and one is tall and blonde, as in the book. So was the cover. And it's just clip art. So that was like very exciting to me when they made this cover. So.
Very nice. Very nice. What questions do we have for Julia? Mary, you must have a question.
Where is Mary? I can't see Mary.
Where's Mary Hammond? Mary Hammond, any questions from you?
Do I have more than one screen of people? Is that how this works?
Hold on.
Actually, I think, Brian, I think you could unmute everybody now. It's a smaller group than we expected. So
Well, you can, everybody can unmute themselves.
yeah.
So Brian, if I see like it looks like I see 12 people. Are there more than that? And I just can't see them?
Yeah, you probably, because I have it on the speaker view, I could do. Can you see everybody now?
I see the same set of people. So
Okay,
maybe,
if you go up to the top,
yeah,
you can do, it's up to the top right,
Gallery?
something that says view.
Gallery view, I see it. Yes.
gallery. But is there more than one page? Because I have one page of people.
No, I
Yeah,
think
it should
it's
just be one.
Okay, well, then, okay, I've got everybody then.
Yeah. There we go. We've got everybody. Kevin, what questions do you have?
So hi, I'm Kevin.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this.
This is Brian's husband, by the way.
Oh, hello, Brian's husband. So nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You have excellent taste in husbands, by the way.
Thank you very much. By the way, not the first time I've heard it, nor do I disagree with it. So I'm curious to know if you told, I haven't read the book yet, but I will. I'm definitely going to read this book. Because I do remember it from the old movies, by the way. I do remember them referencing Reno and I had an understanding of that, but I hadn't thought of it in so long. And it's just such an interesting part of, and sort of a salacious or sexy part of our history, as a country. And sort of takes you back to a time in the 30s where you have a different picture of what the American populace was like, but there's this sort of upper crust version of it that lived under different mores than the rest of us. And I think back then the world found that interesting, and I think today they would find it interesting as well.
Absolutely.
So my question would be, you told the story from I got a little confused based on, it's told by one of the cowboys, right? Your dad,
Right.
in a way, not really your father, but that's what inspired it. But then later you said that it was told on the perspective of a doctor who was the doctor in this place.
Somebody, I should have explained this. Somebody comes to him in the nursing home and they have a picture, and it's of this last group of women that he worked for. And they said, and I'm doing this something. You don't know exactly what they're doing. What can you tell me about this picture? And then it goes back into the past and he tells the story. But as he's telling it, every now and then he'll say something like, you want some of this Jell-O I'm having? They keep trying to tell us it's dessert, and this is like when I was doing research for this, I discovered who invented the Jell-O shot is Tom Lehrer, the guy who writes the funny stories.
Yeah.
He was in the army, and that was how they would smuggle vodka into there because they weren't supposed to have it on it, so they'd make Jell-O shots. So I was like, the things you learn when researching a novel. So that's why it's like an old guy, like looking back in time and telling his story. But the thing about Reno too,
I'm sorry, was he a doctor or not?
he becomes a doctor. What happens is he leaves the ranch. World War II comes. He's a medic during the war, and you learn all this in the course of the book. He becomes a medic. Then he go on the GI Bill. He goes to medical school. He finishes college. He goes to medical school. He works for a undertaker for a while because I had an uncle who was gonna he was going to be a doctor, but then he knocked up a waitress at Shoney's and ended up getting married. So he just became an undertaker because, it required less training and like less complaining from your clients. So I worked that in for his sake. And then he goes to medical school and he moves back to the small town he is from, but he never marries. And so then when he becomes physically frail, he can't live in his house by himself anymore. So he's in this this care facility. And if you don't have family of your own, when you're in that situation, people don't think to visit you. So like he's delivered half the town that he lives in, but none of them come to visit him because they're not his family. So it's to me, very sad.
Yeah.
So, but it's a mostly funny, jokey kind of a thing. So, but the thing I was going to say about Reno is like, it wasn't just rich people. Like the rich people would go to the divorce ranches, but a lot of people would just go and they'd live in a campground or they'd rent a room in somebody's house and they'd work in the stores there so that they could get the quick divorce too. Like this is the glamorous part of it, but there were other parts too. And the other interesting thing about Reno at the time was it was a big gambling hub. And it was so much money passed through it between the divorce industry, and you could get married the same day there also. Whether you'd been divorced or not, you could get married the same day, and gambling, all these things. So it was a hub for money laundering. So all the criminal element used to call it the big store because that's where you could go and like launder all your ill-gotten gains. So I thought that was really interesting too, but you have to sort of focus in on one thing.
So, couple questions. Were these guys really gigolos? I mean, is that the sort of subtle way of saying that, or were
No,
they?
no, they're in this. I don't know how it was on most of them, but for my branch, they cannot, it's the rule that you cannot fraternize with the, I mean, you're supposed to keep them company, but you're not supposed to have intercourse with them. Because if you get caught up in a romance with one of the clients and then the others get jealous, that is not doesn't make for a happy situation. And then if you run off with somebody to marry them, then they're out an employee. So they, on my ranch, and I don't know if anybody else had these rules, but I was like, if I had a ranch, these would be the rules I would make. Because you don't want the ladies fighting over a guy, and you don't want all your good people to leave you. So
you don't know if that was reality or not.
I don't. So
Well,
who
I'm
knows?
sure
I'm sure it
you
happened.
guys had lots of fun there. Yeah, and I'm sure.
No, I would think that they tended to be gigolos, as was just suggested.
Well, some of them were, I'm sure. And it was like, and there's at the end of the book, he's talking about like if he'd married one of the people who he worked for, say, and then they got divorced, and then he ended up being, because there would be guys who would just go hang out at the bars, you know, handsome, sort of leathery cowboys just looking to meet a rich lady to marry. So that was definitely a thing, but it's not the thing on this ranch.
Right.
So
How, excuse me, man, how luxurious was this ranch, or was it trying to be rough on purpose? Like
well, oh no, you'll like this. See, I had to take my experience to make it. And my husband's a TV writer, and he worked at Frasier, which is on Paramount, but Paramount lot. So he could walk to work, which is amazing. But it had the way the set designers could create anything, and it would be the prettied up version of it. Oh, and you know, at the beginning of Bonanza, when they're like, the Cartwrights are galloping across the field, that's outside of Reno. So I was like, so that when they bought the ranch in the book, in the world of the book, the ranch was a cattle ranch that went belly up during the Depression. And so this guy buys it cheap. He comes out of Chicago, buys it cheap. And then he gets a Hollywood set designer to come make it look like a ranch, but it's like a fancy ranch, like from a Hollywood movie. So it seems like it's rustic, but it's kind of not rustic. So, because the ladies are going to want the indoor plumbing. You know, once you've gone with indoor plumbing, you don't want to go back. So it is a very fancy, but not really very fancy, because they had in town, they had like a hotel called the Riverside Hotel, which was super fancy. So if that's what you wanted, there were places you could stay. The Mapes Hotel, where Tarzan of the Mapes stayed, was super fancy. And the people who would give concerts, like Benny Goodman and guys like that, Reno was sort of conveniently in the middle. So they would stop over in Reno, do a show, and go on, because there's some like a union kind of a thing that you can't travel more than a certain amount without having to pay them. So if they stopped over on Reno on the way, they could, so they would get huge acts. And, you know, there was like a fancy hotel, the Riverside Hotel. There was a guy there who was what did he do? He was some kind of like a 2-bit actor or something. So he like bribed the guys at the front desk to page him every hour in the thing, so that people would think he was very important. And I just thought that was so hilarious. And I tried so hard to get that in there, but I just couldn't. It was like there was too much. It was an embarrassment of riches.
What an adventure the story is. Go ahead, Marlene, you were going to say something? You have to unmute.
Okay. Was it difficult to get the book published, and how did you happen to get chosen by Barnes and Noble? Is that a?
I had a first novel that did really well. It's also much more Hollywood centric, the first one. And that one was HarperCollins also. And so they, you know, it was nominated for the best debut of its year by the American Booksellers Association. People loved it. It was funny. It was a great experience, you know, because if you've ever, I was never a prom queen. I know this is a shocker to you guys, but to like walk into a room and have people be delighted to see you just because you had walked in the room and you haven't said a mumbling word. Like, that is the greatest thing ever. I was like, oh, this is what it's like to be prom queen. Because you'd walk into a place where people had read your book and they would be so thrilled to meet you. So that book had done well. So this was my second novel. And the people at HarperCollins, I guess, hooked them up with the Barnes and Noble stuff. And so then I was like, that's so exciting. I knew nothing about this. So I like went and Googled who the other book club picks they had were, and they were like super legit. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a big deal. So it was very exciting. But as I told Richard, my launch date was January 6th. I don't know if anybody here remembers January 6th,
Yes,
but
we
that is
all
not an
do.
ideal launch date.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway,
This is very encouraging because, you talk to people and they tell you, whoever they are, that, oh, it's the publishing business is in such a bad situation. But you're living proof that that's not necessarily the case. It's great.
yeah, because if you have something that people are interested in, like my editor, when she was trying to buy the first book, she said, she was pitching me, so I would pick her. And she's like, I'd like to publish books that are like incredibly well written, but you actually want to read them. And I was like, hey, those are my favorite kind of books. Because you know how there's some that they're fabulous. They're terrific pieces of art. And you just think, oh, geez. So they're like homework, and mine are not. They're giddy. So, because my editor was like, there are not a lot of books that are giddy. And I was like, yeah, that's my jam. Because my husband's a comedy writer.
What's the story of the first book? Is it related at all to the second book?
Who is asking me?
Oh,
It's
sorry, it's Kevin.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
Sorry.
It's about a guy. It's about the way I had the idea for the first book was I was 50 when I started writing it, and my daughter had to read To Kill a Mockingbird for school, and I hadn't read it since I was 13. So I read it again so we could talk about it. Of course, we never talked about it. But when I read it this time, I was like, oh, Boo Radley must be on the autism spectrum, because when I read it at 13, nobody sort of knew what that was or talked about it or anything. And because I had 2 children, I was like, well, I'll tell you what, it'd be a lot easier to write that character than it'd be to raise him. And I thought that would be a really good topic for a novel. So it's about a novelist whose her kid is on the spectrum, although I never say he's on the spectrum, but it's pretty clear he's on the spectrum. And they often have an obsession, and his obsession is old Hollywood. So he dresses like a guy out of the 1930s when he's 9 years old.
Wow.
And the woman who's his mother had it, like Harper Lee, written this one hugely best-selling book, like, To Kill a Mockingbird, that everybody teaches in school, and she was able to live off of it forever. And then a Bernie Madoff character comes along and takes all her money. Apparently this is a motif. You have money and then somebody comes and takes it from you. And so then she's hard up. And so she hasn't talked to her editor in 25 years. And she calls him and she says, I've got to write another book, and I've got to write it fast so I don't lose my house, because I have this kid. And they don't even know she has a kid. So he sends his own assistant out to Hollywood to help the novelist. But what she really ends up doing is being the companion of the 9-year-old boy, who is, full of, and that was so great because I have so much Hollywood trivia. So he was able to just deliver all of my Hollywood trivia. Because, for example, the old Cedars-Sinai Hospital, the Scientology Center now, that's where George Gershwin died when he had brain cancer. He said, I've got a terrible headache. Everybody thought he was a hypochondriac, but it turns out he had brain cancer and he died. And it's the old Cedars-Sinai. And I was like,
it's also where Liza Minnelli was born, I think.
oh, really? Oh, cool. Yeah. So I just thought, oh my God, if I made him Hollywood obsessed, I could use
And my sister.
Oh, yeah. Well, I could use all my Hollywood trivia, and it was such a feeling of joy. And when I was in New York working for magazines, I was a fashion writer. And so I could use all my fashion knowledge that had accrued for that too. So, because the fashion people would come in to explain to the writers the fashion story, what it was about, so that we could write it. And they would be very glamorous, have just the craziest but most fabulous outfits on. They were often British. They'd be talking to you and you'd be like, oh my God, listen to you, sound amazing. Look how gorgeous you are. I never would have thought of wearing a bustle, but it really works with this. And you haven't made any sense in the past 10 minutes. So it's like, because they were visual and they weren't articulate. And I had never really hung with that crowd before. So that was fascinating to me. So I could use, and those people would walk down the street in New York and people would turn around and look at them And they wouldn't turn around to look at me and go, her sentences are amazing. Do you know this? They were just like focused in on the fashion people. So it's like, if you were a fashion kid, because I would look at the fashion people and think, you're so fabulous. But when you were 10 years old, you must have just gotten the crap beat out of you on the playground. And so then I was like, oh, well, my kid will be a fashion kid and he'll be an old Hollywood fashion kid. And then I can bring all of my things together. So that worked out.
Nice. Now I want to read the first one too. For
You
God's
can read them both. They
I'm
sell
gonna
them at
do
the
the audio
store.
books. That's what I'm going to do. You guys.
What's the title of the first one?
It's called, it's right here. It's called Be Frank with Me. Whoops. Here's the cover of that one. So, but, and see, look, it has the thing about better look next time on the cover. Now. It's very exciting. So, and this one got like translated into many, many, many languages. But
How long did it take you to write each novel?
the first one was 5 years. And I wrote it in secret because it's, you know, at least it wasn't a screenplay, Richard. Because, you know, if I'd still lived in New York and I was writing a novel that I started at 50, and it's like every taxi driver is writing a novel. So it's like, at least it's not, you know, I'm here. And then that one, like I got an agent literally almost overnight, like within a week. I contacted Ann Patchett's agent, if you've read any Ann Patchett's books.
Mhm.
Because I was like, she's my favorite writer. Her agent's gonna love me. I wrote her a letter. She wrote me back the next day. A week later, she was my, this is the Reader's Digest version.
It
She
was
was my
meant to
agent
be.
a week later.
Very
And then
nice.
she sold it. So, and then this one took 3. Better luck next time.
Hmm. And
It-
I'm assuming we are working on another now.
I am. And you know, I had a miserable summer where would wake up from nightmares and tears, like tears streaming down my face, because I would be driving a car and I'd go up the wrong street and go, this is not right. And I'd back out and I'd try another driveway. And my husband was like, your subconscious is unbelievably unsubtle. So, because I was like, going up the wrong road. No, gotta go. So then, but then at the beginning of August, it sort of straightened itself out. And look, this isn't even all of it. I've written this much since the beginning of August. This is 5 chapters. And I sent it to my agent over the weekend. She's like, oh my God, I love it. So we'll see what happens.
Great. I'm so impressed with this. And it's, you know, you started at 50, so that's very
Yeah,
impressive.
I'm 62 now. So, you know, there's still hope for us all.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Who else has questions for our author here? Anyone else have questions?
I have an odd question.
Sure.
Did you work for Glamour at all when you were
I
writing?
did. I was a fashion writer for Glamour. Why do you know somebody who used to work there?
I used to work with them sometimes, and I knew Ruth Whitney. Was she the
Oh,
editor?
sure. She was the editor-in-chief. Oh my gosh. What did you do for them?
I did their Women of the Year show for like 9 years. I produced it.
Oh my God. Oh, that's so fun. Listen, that job at Glamour, that was one of the high points of my life. I've
They're
never
the
had more
best
fun.
people in the
They
world.
were
Ruth
so
Whitney
great.
was a genius, absolutely,
I loved
and a
it.
wonderful person. Yeah,
Yes. No, that was a great, like some of my best friends that I'm still best friends with today. Are
my
from
best
Glamour.
client. You know,
Oh, yeah?
I'm sort of Facebook friends with a couple of them, but yeah,
Oh, who are you friends with still?
I'm trying to remember their name. Allison and you know, the 2 main ones that were by her side. One of them passed.
Mhm.
What was her name? I'm terrible with names. I'm not going to remember. I'll have to
I
look.
can't remember people's names anymore either, but I worked with at Mademoiselle and Glamour. So I'd worked at Mademoiselle forever. Then I went to Good Housekeeping, which all of my college friends thought was hilarious because I was the worst housekeeper they'd ever met. And then I went to Glamour, and then Mademoiselle was dying. And the minute I was at Glamour, because you're in the same building, same elevator shaft.
Were you in the Madison Avenue building, right?
Yeah, over
Yeah.
Books. So then they wanted me back. So then I went back to Mademoiselle. So, but when I was at Mademoiselle, my first job was to work in the fiction department, and I had to read 10,000 manuscripts a year to find 12 that we could publish, which was very hard. And it really taught me a lot of lessons. And that's why I don't think I started to write till I was 50, because I never felt like I had a story to tell. Because you get these stories that were beautifully written. The sentences were gorgeous, and the stories were so boring. You just wanted to stab your eyeballs out. So I was like, if you don't have a good story to tell, it doesn't matter how good your sentences are. So, and when I had that thing walking down the street about Boo Radley, I was like, that would be an interesting story. That's a story I bet I could tell. So, but that was that's like the high point of my life, was working at that Condé Nast building.
Nice. This has been interesting. This is nice. This is, as I said, our first time we've had a novelist. We usually have history books and books of local history in LA, and this has been very interesting and very exciting and fun.
Oh, good. Yeah, because I can talk for hours because I don't get to talk to people much.
How long have you?
Hi.
Why? Why are you
Nice
going around
today.
people? Are you at least playing tennis?
No, I don't play tennis. So I don't have any hand-to-eye coordination. I just have grit. So
So your husband plays tennis. Is that the
he
story?
does play tennis.
Oh, I see. That was the case with Robin and I. She played tennis and I was like, I don't like this game. But I did get my name on a loving cup there by accident, actually, and it's still in the showcase there.
Oh, that's very exciting. So, but yeah, it's so interesting to write novels, having read novels all my life. And you know how when you're a freshman in high school and they talk about the symbolism of things and like how things are worked into it on purpose. And then after you write a book and you go, and somebody says to you, oh, I like the way you did that. And you're like, yeah, I did that on purpose. But you know, it works. For example, in this book, like there's a masquerade ball. So somebody has to have a mask. And so what my son had been in Midsummer Night's Dream, he played bottom and he had this paper mache donkey's head that was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And I thought about it all the time. And I knew I needed a mask. And I named a character after a bookseller friend of mine named Portia. I was like, Portia, that's kind of a Shakespeare name. And then I went, oh, and I thought of the mask. So then the mask is in there, right? And my editor was like, you know what I loved about the mask? It was like a sight gag, and then it was a plot device, and then it was a metaphor. And I said, yes, because then there's a whole Midsummer Night's Dream thing in there. And the girl who's the flyer becomes obsessed with the Titania's costume, the good fairy thing. And she flies into town, see where I'm going here? And then she becomes the good fairy of two other people, the fairy godmother. And so I was like, and it's like I did it on purpose, but I didn't. It was very exciting. So it just makes you experience things in a whole new way.
Nice,
So,
nice.
you better cut me off, Richard, because I'll talk all night.
Juanita, any other questions? Mary, Marlene, Kevin, Chuck, John?
I don't have any questions, but I remember friends or people that I knew in the 60s that were still going to Reno.
Yeah.
And so did you talk to any people that would still be alive that don't have dementia?
No, I didn't. And you know, the Misfits, if you ever saw that movie, the Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, that's set at Reno because she's in town getting a divorce too.
Yeah, and what I thought about the Misfits is he looked all grubby, you know, being a cowboy type, and she was always had perfect makeup, and I thought, you can't be, you know, a perfect makeup person and then a grubby looking person.
Yeah, no, I know. It's very funny. And then she and Arthur Miller directed that, and then they got divorced right after. I was like, it's in the air. So, but yeah, no, I have since talked to many people who got divorced there. So, but I didn't get it ahead of time.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, this has been great.
Okay, good.
There's no other questions, we'll wrap it up. But Julia, I want to thank you for agreeing to do this. And I know we booked it like months in advance. So you're very patient and you've been very captivating. And tomorrow, I promise, I'm going to get.
Yeah, go by. They have
That's
signed ones at Chevalier's. The ones at Barnes and Noble may be signed. They may have blown through all those. You know, you can order it. And if you like a book, I say this to everybody, any book that you like, you want to help the author, review it anywhere you can positively, because when people go to look for books, they go on like Amazon or they go on Goodreads and they look for what's well reviewed. So it actually, I didn't think it mattered until I wrote books. I got on this side of us like, oh my God, it makes a huge difference. So any book that you like, or anybody whose kids you hope they can get braces for,
or fix the fence next.
Fix the fence. I have a rotting fence situation here. Just, you know, weigh in. So
we're going to get that fence fixed for you. I know.
I sure hope so. So it's a Shonda, I'll tell you. So.
All right.
Okay, it was really fun talking to you guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Julia.
Thank you.